Well, welcome everybody today. This is the Thinking That Counts podcast. I am Abel Maestas, a math coach here at Ceres Unified School District. I'd like to welcome my guest again today to talk about building thinking classrooms in mathematics, book by Peter Liljedahl. Today we're discussing chapters 8 and 9. I'll let my guests introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Grant McCormick, and I teach Integrated Math 1 at Central Valley High School.
Hi, my name is Sarah Mucha, and I teach Accelerated Math 2 at Central Valley High School.
I'm Brian Wise. I'm one of the district's education technology specialists, and I used to teach high school science and just a little teensy bit of math.
Hi, Diana Andrade, Math 1, Math 2 here at Argus, our alternative education high school.
Hi, I'm Tucker Schwarberg. I teach math at Ceres High School, Math 3, Accelerated Math 3, and AP Calculus.
All right, awesome. Thank you guys for joining me again today. So let's dive into Chapter 8. Chapter 8 is on how we foster student autonomy in a thinking classroom. I guess one of the big things, I'll just state kind of the problem that he lays out, is that a lack of autonomy is synonymous with a lack of choice. And so how do we foster that in a thinking classroom? So I'll just kind of open it up to this discussion. What do you guys think about this?
I've been using the vertical whiteboards most days in my classroom, and I noticed that I started doing this, where I would tell students, okay, I like what you're doing here. Maybe you should go look at this person's vertical whiteboard. I think that students are a little shy to go over and ask questions. So after reading this chapter today, I really tried to prompt students and told them, what are you supposed to do when you don't know what to do? And then one of the students said, I should look at other whiteboards. And I said, good. And you could also go over there. Like, you don't have to stay at your whiteboard. You can go over and talk to other groups. So I started noticing sometimes they get too wrapped up in their own whiteboard and their own work that they're not really considering the other, like taking a step back and looking at their work. So sometimes I would cue kids, I noticed that you two have the same end behavior, but your zeros or x-intercepts look different. Why don't you talk about that and see, who's correct? So then they would kind of fight over who was right. It was a good little debate today.
Yeah, I think the idea of the knowledge mobility in the class is sometimes it's a little foreign to students. I was in a classroom today. I was working in a classroom today, and we were on vertical whiteboards, and some students said, everyone else can see my work. I'm like, yeah, I know that. Like, but what if they just copy? Because they haven't done this as much. And so I said, well, maybe it's really about like sharing the knowledge. So they were really new about it, and they thought, oh, well, man, what if they're just copying me? Well, that doesn't really help anybody. The other thing that happened today that was really kind of cool is two adjacent groups. One group had one answer. They were working on proportional reasoning. And one group had y equals 1/2 x, and the other group had y equals 2x. And so I brought them together and said, come over here to this one. These guys have y equals 2x. All right, let's go to this board. They have y equals 1/2 x. One of you is right. Who is it? And then I left. And they're like, we are. And they got into this like battle about who was. And then they started talking about the work that was on the boards and justifying their answers. And then the one group went back and they changed their answer. And then I checked in with them. So what happened? And they said, well, we actually flip-flopped these. And then I asked them some questions that actually furthered the discussion. Well, what if you did want a 1/2? How would that look? And these were 7th graders, and so they had to start thinking about switching their x and y variables so that it looked different. And I just thought that was such a great time for extension. But the shared knowledge that they had and the ability to kind of move that around was pretty awesome to see in that class.
I think this whole chapter for me was about, as a teacher, right, we're usually in control of our classroom. So giving up that control, right, which is something that has definitely been evolving over like the last 10 years for me, for sure. You still have students who rely on the teacher for the learning. And I think this whole chapter is really about making that shift, that we need to have them rely on each other for that knowledge transfer and for that learning to occur. And the teacher maybe is just as an affirmation, or like you said, to push them to the next level. So I think that's going to take time, but I think as more of us maybe implement these things, we'll see that. But to me, that's like the biggest thing. And I know for some teachers, that's hard to give up that control. I mean, it's not easy either for me, but it's just building upon that and really getting them. I think you mentioned about trust, or, having them to trust or to be able to be confident to ask. So all of those things have to be built in.
I think also they start to form their own little community in your room with each period. And I think that's really awesome to see the culture that's starting. Even though hopefully next year when I start this in the beginning of the school year, that culture and stuff will build sooner. Because, I tried my best first semester, but without having all these resources and this toolkit, it wasn't as successful, right? But now I do see them, not asking me first. They're asking their group, and they're asking another group, and they're eliminating all their resources before they come to me. And then the part about fewer hands being raised, I started to observe that today. I'm like, are my students actually raising their hand? It's like, no, it's more of an organic conversation that's happening. And as I'm wandering the room, they're sometimes asking me questions, but it's less formal. They're not raising their hand. And I like that in my classroom. I don't want students to, it's too, I'm starting to go from this type A person to not so type A.
I noticed this when I was having students work in groups and work on the vertical spaces, that they would ask questions. If they didn't get stuck, they could progress easily, that there wasn't much, copying. And I've noticed that, just to reiterate what we've discussed in previous chapters, that they don't really, look at other people's boards and copy, line for line. Like, I've never seen that. Maybe they take an idea here or there. But this idea of getting them to be autonomous was really, really kind of eye-opening. In that when I have had them work in groups, sometimes I have kids come up to me, I'm not able to get around the room fast enough. So they want an answer, so they're going to come to me. And I never really thought about this. Like, okay, how can I get them to communicate with each other to where I'm essentially not even needed? I'm just more of a facilitator. And this idea that you need to explicitly teach it, I thought was great. You need to encourage it. You need to kind of help facilitate that behavior, because, they don't know how to do these things. So I thought this was really a great idea. And then two, just the idea that, if you have two groups that, have conflicting answers, or maybe they did something differently, having that discussion, which one's right, or, explain what you did here, having them talk about it, I thought was really good, because we use that on our own personal whiteboards, like underneath their desks, like all the time. I'll walk around, I'll grab multiple whiteboards and I'll have that. But just kind of taking those great teaching ideas and strategies of what work even in a DI classroom, and implementing them, in a thinking classroom manner, could be really, really powerful.
Yeah, I've done today, and we'll get to this in another chapter, but I did a think, pair, share in a thinking classroom. There are opportunities for those things as well when we get to the chapter on consolidating information. One thing that I do want to talk about just briefly is the part that says, don't say, micro moves, don't say or show anything another group could. Like, that's pretty powerful as a micro move. Have you used that? Has anybody used that in their class yet?
It's hard because, and I think, as I've been undertaking this year, my instinct has been like, I kind of have like an ideal solution method I think that most of them should be going towards. And when I get too focused on that, I get the problems of the kids not being able to get around to all the groups fast enough, and them coming to me and then losing sight of what you were just saying about using the students to share those ideas. If someone else in the group can show it, why wouldn't you use that? That kind of just goes into the prepping and planning that, particularly our open up curriculum has, with those 5 practices and the anticipating charts and seeing what possible ways could students start off doing this, and how can you bring that together? Because I when I first look at all those charts, I'm like, oh, wouldn't really necessarily see how to tie that all together, but there's something there, and it's such a more powerful experience when you can get it to happen. And I'm not saying I do it super well yet, but I'm still finding my instincts on that. But just when it is really powerful.
I did want to say that today my students were sketching polynomial functions, and one of the it was from standard form, so they had to factor it. And one of the factors ended up being x squared minus 3. And every single class had such a hard time solving this quadratic equation, and it was just plus or minus square root 3. And then there was discussion about where does that go on the number line. And normally what I would do if first period struggled is I would then be like, okay, well, second period, we got to go over this before they do this. But I thought that's taking the learning away from them, and they're not being able to experience it. So I had to go through finding a group in each class that had, the correct answer for the x-intercepts, but also could explain where they put it on the x-axis. So I had some moments like that where it's like only 1 or 2 groups have it, but I tried to just point the other groups in that direction. Oh, why don't you look over here at so-and-so's board? Ask them how they got that, because it's different than yours. Mm-hmm. So that's how I've been trying to use it.
I think all of this is super powerful, right? Giving the kids the autonomy, and then also the voice, right? Like you said, the hands up, right? We don't want the hands up. We want them to just be able to freely, discuss or to question or to ask. And I think the last sentence in this chapter, where it talks about how, we're building the independence that's needed for thinking, classroom to function well, but it also enables them with those 21st century skills that we need them to have, so they can collaborate in the real world. And I think I know here at Argus, that's something we definitely talk about all the time with the kids, is the 21st century skills. And, just being able to go organically and ask the other group or another group for that help, or, hey, what did you guys do here, right? That's what it would look like in the real world. And life after high school. They're not going to raise their hand and ask their boss. And a lot of them are timid, right? Or they're, like you said, they're shy to ask. So this is all practice for that, and it's all good stuff.
Cool. Nice.
Yeah, and furthermore, too, I mean, not just the idea that we're removing the control of the teacher or, the cumbersome questions on a teacher and handing that to students. I think, too, you're empowering students to teach the material, right? And there's that great inverted triangle, right, that shows how you learn, 10% of what you read, 20%, so on and so forth, right? But at the top is you remember 90% of what you can teach, right? So we're really giving the students that opportunity to take that role of teaching, in communicating their reasoning and logic to other students, which makes their learning that much more powerful.
Yeah, that kind of gets us into the next chapter kind of nicely there, like I planted you there, Tucker, or something. Right. There are times when all the students are stuck and we can't utilize what they have on the board. And how do we get them to the next piece? So the next chapter is on how we use hints and extensions in the thinking classroom. And one of the pieces of this chapter that I thought was, some of us here have been teaching for a long time. And some of us not as many years, but all these years. And you kind of have the feeling of, how do I keep the kids engaged and in the moment to be teaching that math, in which he calls flow. But I think one of the pieces here that just, I guess, in all my years of teaching, I never saw this, and I've been using it ever since I read this chapter, is the kind of the stepping ladder in the modes of engagement to increase challenge on page 159. It goes doing, justifying, explaining, teaching, and creating. And for so many years, I've done exactly what he did, and I went from doing to explaining. Like they did something, and then I would say, how did you do it? But I missed the critical piece in the middle. And it just never dawned on me that a student, in order to explain what they've done, has to have confidence to justify what they've already done in their head. And so recently, ever since I read this, when I'm visiting classrooms and I'm working with students in a thinking classroom, I'll ask them, "You ready to bet $100 on that?" Mm-hmm. And it's just amazing to see what they're. No. All right. Well, maybe you should be able to do that. I'll come back, and then I come back. Well, you ready? You're going to bet me $100? Yes. All right. Okay. So how did you do it? So then that's my next question. Like, what did you do? And then I'll tell them, well, you're right, or give them another hint. But I've been able to see the power of just that justification piece, and it really makes a difference. And I don't think in all my years teaching I've done that very at all, if at all, very effectively. So it gets to kind of what Tucker was saying about being able to teach it. That teaching and creating is at the highest piece of that engagement ladder, right after the explaining piece. But like I said, the most powerful piece for me in this case was that justifying that I was missing. What do you guys think?
Well, the first thing I noticed in this chapter is it really resonated with something that I've been trying to explain to people for many years now. And that is, we can learn a lot in how we structure our lessons and how we structure our teaching by watching how our students play video games. And I think when I say that, sometimes I have a hard time explaining myself, and people think, what do you mean, like we're supposed to make video games that are educational? And I'm like, no, not necessarily that. This chapter, I think, spells that out really well, what I meant. Explains it much better than I do. But the problem is I can't pronounce the Hungarian-born psychologist's name. I'm not even going to try to do that. But the three-part optimal experience model: number 1, clear goals; number 2, immediate feedback; and number 3, a balance between the ability of the doer and the challenge of the task. If you look at the video games that are popular, they all do this really, really well. And some of the games I see my sons playing, they don't even look like the coolest games in terms of graphics and action. And I have a feeling the reason that they like them, well, first of all, is because their friends are playing the same game. But I think at the root of the popularity is that they nail this. There's clear little goals. There's not one huge goal. Maybe there is one huge goal, but there's a lot of little goals along the way. And they always start you off real easy with some little tutorials, real low risk. You're not really playing with your friends yet. You're kind of learning how to operate the keyboard or your little controller, and immediate feedback. These are things that the video game companies, I think, they've engineered their games to kind of get our kids into that. And we can kind of watch that and maybe incorporate some of those concepts into our teaching.
Yeah, they maximize that, what he calls flow, right? The greater the challenge, you can end up with frustration, right, if they don't have the ability.
Which is what happens when I try to play the game with my son.
Right.
I get very frustrated, and then
Yeah.
I quit, and then I go watch
me
TV.
Trying to play
Right.
Beat Saber the other day on the Quest. I'm playing this game, and my kids are like, "Why are you failing at that so easily?" Whatever, kids. Or if the ability is great but the challenge is too low, then they get bored. So our goal is how do we find the balance between the challenge and the ability to create flow and not have kids in frustration or in boredom.
And yeah, that's a challenge that's, I think, only been heightened because of the gap that's been created because of COVID. Because, I have all sorts of students that I'm like, why aren't you in accelerated math? And it's, I think a lot of them are not as motivated to take those classes the past couple of years because it was just like that gap was created. And so I have a really high level ability and good knowledge of the stuff that they did before, and which makes it great for when I'm trying to showcase other ways of doing things. But then just the students that have become so unmotivated in that time, where they got away with no accountability because no matter how much I said on Zoom, write this on your Pear Deck, I was muted, so I was never going to get through to them, and so it was that's the challenge right now, and I'm still looking trying these things. I don't feel like I've found a whole lot of success with this chapter in particular, but I see pathways forward.
This is just the, age-old problem to factory-typed differentiation. How do you, as a teacher, teach every, the 30 kids in the room, plus or minus, to what they need? You can put up a problem. Some are done right away, and then some, even by the time you're covering it, don't know, still what to do. I did really like how on page 151 they talk about the structuring of exercises with factoring quadratics, and how you can build that structure to where it's an increased challenge. And this kind of makes sense, right? We've talked about this when we do prior knowledge with like matched pair examples, like, okay, remember this skill, now you do one, right? To kind of get them. So, and I just thought that was so powerful how he does go through the whole unit of factoring quadratics in one page. And if your students are able to understand the idea, and I think that's really like the powerful part, right? Starting with the conceptual development of multiplying two binomials together to get the trinomial, and then breaking that down, how that translates into factoring, was really powerful. But just the structure, and you have to be purposeful as a teacher in these tasks to where you can slowly increase the challenges as they progress.
Yeah, it's using the students' prior knowledge and then the ability to think about patterns, right? And increase and increase. And he said this was, and I highlighted this because it was so powerful. He said in grade 10, when they've used this sequence, they get through the entire sequence in 40 to 60 minutes. That is, depending on the curriculum, we were able to cover the entire factoring quadratics unit in one lesson. That, when we talk about going slow to go fast, we go slow to build that thinking classroom. And then once you've got this, it's like one day. And we've spent so many days on things like, well, I know Sarah probably knows this. She teaches those kids quadratics, right? That are factoring. So it was fascinating to me. He also gave another example of 1- and 2-step equations, and they did that in a single lesson as well. And it really is, how do we go slow to go fast? This kind of answers that in so many ways.
And I think, too, the power lies in this teaching method where they're thinking, that you're using methods and tasks to where that initial conceptual teaching sticks, to where then the rest of it is automated.
Yeah.
One thing that I really like about this book is every time I finish a chapter, I'm like, oh my gosh, I could use that in my class. I'm walking away with concrete things. And so I was kind of disappointed at how late it took me to pick up this book, because this would have been helpful first semester when they were factoring quadratics. But it's okay, because second semester we did higher degree polynomial factoring. So polynomials that had 4 terms, and I used this. I just changed them to 4 terms, and I went through it, and I was just like, oh, I should have made more problems, because, wow, they were getting them, I like how it's a very slight change as you increase in the problems. The one thing that I didn't do that it talks about is, because right now I'm just projecting like 3 problems on the board. Okay, work with your groups on these ones, and then we pull it back together, and then, okay, we're shuffling the groups again, 3 more problems. Well, I like the idea of, I have these problems in my notebook, and I start them all off with 3 problems, but when one group's ready to move on, like we're saying, differentiating that instruction for them, I give them the next problem. And then, another group steals that problem once they're ready. But I think that also has to do with the knowledge mobility. They need to continue to look at other people's whiteboards. So I did like that idea. I have... like, for instance, in this room, some of these whiteboards are smaller, like the whiteboard things that we have.
Yeah.
So students will need to erase their work. And so I think that was the only setback that I saw. But I did like the idea of the problems organically coming about in the room, and not from me, from other students, right? So
Yeah. You're going to love chapter 10. I feel like I say that every time once we get to the chapter, but how we consolidate lessons, because you keep, I'm just listening to your statements today, Sarah, and there's so many things that I'm like, oh, wait till she gets to chapter 10. Oh, wait till she gets to chapter 10. So I can't wait to talk to you guys next time when we meet for chapter 10. Go ahead.
And I'll just echo what Sarah was saying about, just the timing of the next chapter, and thinking, well, I could have used that. But then, because I'm thinking in particular about just the vertical whiteboards, kind of feel like maybe my class was kind of stalling in terms of progress, because they were in their own worlds quite a bit, and then getting to this chapter and all of a sudden there's mobility. It was just the right timing, and I couldn't have planned that. I don't know, maybe you did, Abel, for all I know. But I just really like this chapter. It in the way that the problems were designed, it just really spoke to me, honestly, in thinking about how when I try to teach something, there's that quote on page 153 that says that variation can only be seen against a backdrop of non-variation, and only one element should be varied at a time. And then I'm thinking, maybe, okay, in what I'm doing, maybe I'm trying to change too many things at once, and I'm trying to go too fast. And if I just slowed it down, we actually probably could get through so much more. And with these tasks, I particularly liked the one-step and two-step equations one that was here, because that's my course. And I from the day one in my class, I say, everything you learn in math, you're going to learn how to do forwards and backwards. And yesterday, we were given a test, and this girl, she's taking it, and she raises her hand, and there was this question on there where I hadn't taught them how to do it, because it was like, for our proficiency scales, it would be like a level 4, the problem solving question. And she's like looking at me with this incredulous look, and she's like, isn't this just the same thing but backwards? And I'm like, I didn't keep a poker face, but I turned around and walked away, and it was just such a good feeling. And I'm just really seeing where I can apply this, not just to, of course, that unit, but really anything else. This doesn't just apply to solving equations or factoring quadratics. It's really throughout all of math.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'll echo that, because today I was testing in my unit on inequalities, and I was sharing with Abel. I had probably about a handful of students who read the problem, the story problem, and they actually could answer it. They knew what the answer would be. And the creating the inequality was the frustrating part for them, because they're like, well, why do I have to create it if I know the answer? So then, I prompted them and had them, okay, well, how did you solve it? Think about that, and then kind of work backwards, like you said, from there to come up with the inequality. So I was pleased with those kids who could read that real world problem and know the answer, right, without. A couple of things that I did want to mention. The quote on page 152, in the middle there of the page, it says, when students are not thinking, everything we teach them is difficult. And when students are thinking, however, almost anything is possible. Like, I want to put that on my wall and like blow it up somewhere, because I think that's super powerful. That's, obviously where we're trying to lead our kiddos. I did have a question. It's like, how does this look with our curriculum? Are these MVP, the open up problems, do they lead to this type of variation? Is that something we tweak? How does that look? So that is a question that I have that's swirling around.
I do feel like I see that quite a bit, and then there's times where when I teach it, I go back later and like, oh, that was there. I didn't see it in my first time through doing it, but I think it's there in quite a bit. I think it's very well designed in that aspect.
Good.
Yeah, and one of the he does in the Q&As, he says, where can I get such sequence of tasks that progressively increase challenge along with parallel tasks? And his answer was, the list of exercises in textbooks are, for the most part, designed in exactly this way. But be critical. Textbook exercises are designed for practice and not thinking and learning. So they do not always adhere to the ideas of variation discussed earlier. So I think if you're looking at like set problem in Open Up, the set and the ready, set, goes, like those aren't designed for thinking. The task within the launch and those are designed for thinking. But there are some times where we have to kind of look through a little bit more critically and see, do I need to kind of fill in a hint in here that the students are going to need to access the next part to maintain that flow. Because sometimes it might be that the challenge is too high. So I need to figure out a hint to put that challenge in a place where now we can get those kids into the flow. So I do think that the curriculum is designed pretty nicely for implementation of a building thinking classroom. Some things just got to be kind of thought through. Like Grant said, the first time you run through it, it might not, you're learning it just as much as, you're learning the curriculum. You might know the content, but you're learning that, and finding those spots are going to be helpful. One thing that I did want to talk about that I think connects to our district specifically is on page 150. The was it Hungarian? Is that the really long name there? In the middle of the page here, it says clear goals every step of the way and immediate feedback on action. And like you were saying, Brian, about how games are created. But I think this ties really nicely to the ideas of learning intentions and success criteria, right? Those give clear direction for kids, and you can use proficiency scales, rubrics, things like that to give that feedback, immediate feedback into action as kids go through that. And this kind of goes back to something that I heard Michael McDowell say, in that 80% of the feedback students get is from their peers, and 90% of it is wrong, right? So how do we make sure that in groups that knowledge mobility is moving, but a lot of that is correct information?
I just wanted to add some of my little side notes. I made a lot of side notes in this chapter. And I think the group of us here, right, who are implementing these things, our classrooms, even from the beginning of the year, our classrooms have looked so much different, right? I think we can all agree with that. So I'm wondering, how does that transfer? Because we've given our students Chromebooks, right? So in a lot of classes, they're sitting at their desk, they're on their Chromebooks, and they do, work in groups, and they could be collaborating. I'm sure they are. So I just don't know how, all of these changes, I think they come in our math classrooms, right? And they probably have a little bit of shock, because it's oh, I'm not going to be sitting. I got to be up. I got to be showing everybody my work. So I'm thinking of it from their perspective too. And I just kind of wanted to throw that out there, because I did write down, a lot of digital curriculum, Chromebooks. How do we think our students feel about it?
So I gave my first assessment and performance task for Unit 1, and with it, I had my students fill out a confidence survey. So how confident are you on your Unit 1 performance task on a scale from 1 to 10, and then also your confidence level on the summative assessment. And at the end, I also asked them, any questions, comments, concerns that you have about the new way that we're kind of running the classroom. And so it was really interesting to see their comments. A lot of students were like, we're not taking as many notes. Could we take more notes in class? And I know that there's a note-taking chapter in here. So I might have, the timing.
Timing.
Next week's reading.
Yeah. But the next day I just kind of addressed it. Your notes are for you. Whatever you want to put in your notebook, you are more than welcome to. It doesn't need to be teacher-led, which the chapter may hint at as well, because I may have looked ahead a little bit. But because I wanted some ammo when the kids were like, we're not taking notes. It's well, you're the learner. I don't need to tell you exactly what example. We're doing a bunch of examples, whichever one speaks to you, So I just thought it was interesting. And also seeing what they scored their confidence level at for the summative assessment versus what their actual data was interesting. But I also think they're accelerated students, so sometimes they downplay their confidence level. I don't want to say that I'm a 10 because I don't know, I'm a little unsure. But my kids did really good on the summative assessment, and I was really happy with it. I was nervous because I'm oh man, I'm doing all these things in this book and it's not going to work out, and then I'm just a failure, but they did okay. So I was all right, we're going to continue with this. And I do need to find a balance between the note taking and the vertical whiteboards. And I told them that I'm taking accountability on my part as well. It's not just all on them, so.
Chapter's coming up. And yeah, again, Michael McDowell. If you don't know who Michael McDowell is, go out there and search him on Amazon. He's got a lot of great books, a lot of great stuff on PBL and just deep and transfer and surface level learning. But one thing he talked about was that that there's a lot of research on this, is that and Joe Bowler talks about this as well, is the productive struggle. The struggle itself is where the learning happens, and that students don't even have to get things right to have those synapses start working in their brain and to actually grow. So he showed an example that students were just talking and still confused about something that they had just saw on YouTube, and they were confused, but they had a chance to talk it out, and they end up scoring a lot higher on this quiz than students that just had watched it and were actually told pretty much the answers to the quiz. So the results seem to match up with that, in that they might feel like, I don't really know if I'm doing this right, yet on the test they overperformed than what they even felt. So it's kind of an interesting thing there. It's backed up by Joe Bowler's work and Michael McDowell. That was a pretty cool observation.
Yeah, I remember. I don't know if you're talking about the same thing, Abel, but I remember that one part where Michael McDowell said they did that study and somebody walked in, like they explained how to solve a problem or how to perform something, and then somebody walked in and said, "No, that's wrong." Is that the one he was talking about? Yeah.
They were explaining it incorrectly.
They were explaining it incorrectly.
Yeah.
And the students retained the information better when they had it explained the wrong way, and then somebody came in and said that was wrong. And I remember thinking, boy, that was kind of the opposite of what I was taught in the DI era, which was first time learning is like an endangered little bird. You have to be very careful, make sure the conditions are just right so they'll lay the right egg, and you don't want to be unteaching them something that's a misconception down the road. But sometimes, I'll reach back way back in my life. We used to talk about, in constructivism, we used to talk about these things called discrepant events. Sometimes when something runs counterintuitive or breaks the normal flow, it's a moment when everybody's attention is piqued, and then that's a teachable moment. So, good teachers know, I don't think I was a good teacher, but good teachers know how to recognize those opportunities and kind of take advantage. One more thing I'll say about Michael McDowell. If you do Google him, I recommend that you Google him and read some of his stuff. Just be careful, because if you just Google the name, you'll get like a famous race car driver, and that's not the same person. I found that out.
Okay.
I found that out the hard way. Yeah, you have to type Michael McDowell education or something like that.
Did you read about the famous race car driver?
Yeah, that's not the same guy.
Oh, okay. All right, so we're about to wrap up this episode here. Does anybody have any last comments about these chapters, 8 and 9? All right, I'm excited to dive in next time we meet into chapters 10, which is consolidating the lesson in the thinking classroom. And then we get to, yes, that one, how do we take notes in a student classroom? So it's going to be excited to talk to you guys about that. Thank you again for joining me today, and what a great discussion. So we'll talk to you all next time.